Hi everyone, Autumn here, coming to you today, as always, as a life coach and as somebody who has a lot of understanding, having been through narcissistic abuse myself. So today I wanted to talk about sexuality and sex within the context of being in a relationship with a narcissist. There is an author and a professor, an expert named Sam Venkin that most of you probably are aware of. He has a very active YouTube channel and talks a lot about narcissism and has written a great book called Malignant Self-Love, Narcissism Revisited. And I really like his theories on sexuality and how he is able to break up narcissists into different categories. And two of the main categories he talks about, besides the traditional, which would kind of be the covert and the overt, is cerebral and somatic. In the cerebral narcissists, he explains, are narcissists that are much more covert, I guess, and more intellectually based, where somatic are the much more overt and outwardly based, grandioso, over the top type of narcissists. And I'm sure that explanation does not do it justice, but I don't want to get caught up in the labels, and I'll talk more about how Sam Venkin outlines these two different types of narcissists, and I'll also link to some of his videos because he's a lot of great stuff to say. He himself has been diagnosed as a narcissistic psychopath, and so he also is very aware of his stuff, so he's a lot to say. So it's kind of nice, coming from that angle. Well, I want to talk about the cerebral narcissists today and their sexuality. This hits home for me. My ex-husband was definitely a cerebral / covert, whatever you want to call it, narcissist. And when it comes to sex, he is the textbook case of a cerebral narcissist, especially in relationship to Sam Venkin's definition of a narcissist, cerebral narcissist, and how sex plays out in their life and what it means to them and how it looks in the context of a relationship. So cerebral narcissists, and you may have been with one or are with one in a romantic level, tend to have a cycle in terms of their sexuality, which I saw very clearly with my relationship. I'll tell you that before I woke up to what was really the truth in my relationship with my husband and saw him for who he was, saw him as a narcissist and as having sociopathic traits, when I was still kind of blinded and in love and taking all the blame for everything and so on, I will tell you that probably the most difficult part of that relationship was being rejected sexually. I want to say the last 8-9 months of a relationship, we didn't have sex once. No sexual contact, no making out, no touching, no even kissing with passionate kissing, only like pecks on the lips kissing. And as much as all of the other manipulation and lies and the way in which he betrayed me and was deceitful and used and abused, those things were definitely all hard and they were difficult. And looking back, those things are much more difficult. But in the moment of being in the relationship, being rejected sexually was by far the absolute worst part of it. We did not have sex often at all. By the beginning of it, it was somewhat normal. There was always a lot of control issues, him having to be in control. For example, with him, I could not, and you'll find this with a lot of cerebral narcissists, or even somatic to a certain degree. There's a lot of rules around sex, because sex is a form of narcissistic supply, of course, getting attention and feeling wanted, but it's much bigger than that. And it has a lot to do with control and power. And so you'll see, like my ex-husband, that a lot of narcissists will have a lot of rules around intimacy, in particular with sex. So for example, my ex-husband, there was a lot of rules. For example, he did not perform oral sex, and he did not like to receive oral sex. He was vehemently against me being on top or in any position other than below him, literally. So only positions where he could be above me and have full control. Another thing that was basically off limits was talking. No dirty talking, no kind of role playing, nothing like that. He was partially deaf. He wore hearing aids. He was born that way. He was only 30 when we broke up. So it's not that he was old. He was just born that way. And he wouldn't use hearing aids. So he was quiet, didn't hear a lot. So I wrote a lot of this stuff off to do with that. But looking back, this is not what it was at all. So like lights had to be off usually. There wasn't any passionate kissing allowed, basically, with sex. It was difficult, and it's painful to be rejected. And I think this is one of the reasons why he did it, and why a lot of cerebral narcissists do reject their partners sexually or don't want to have sex with them, is because their partners want to have sex with them. So this is a way to control them, to give them, to make them hurt, to make the narcissist above you, power-wise, to feel so omnipotent and magnanimous that they have this woman who, and I talk about men in this case because this is what I found to be most specific to men with sexuality, that this woman wants them and they're so amazing that they can reject them, right? So there's this kind of like ridiculous, childish, juvenile type of justification and excuse for it. But it goes so much deeper than that. And that's why I really like Sam Vinkin's description and information and how he pathologizes it. Because I believe that, also I believe in terms of experience myself and working with clients and all my research and talking to people, that sex becomes an extension of their feelings towards their mothers. And you'll find with a lot of narcissists, in particular narcissists that are more cerebral or inverted or covert, whatever you want to call them, that they have huge mother issues. Their mothers were either narcissists themselves, were deeply critical, unloving, cold, non-affectionate. And this lends itself to the man as he grows up to see all women, as an extension of his mother. So how cliche is that, right? We look at just classical Freudian philosophy and theories in psychology that still hold up, and this is one of them. So they tend to personify the dynamic between them and their mother within the romantic / intimate sexual relationship. They also have a propensity towards dividing women into two different categories. There's the Madonna and the whore. And this is a very well-known concept that even men that aren't narcissistic tend to hold these values. I think it's partly a religious thing, it's partly how they were raised, it's partly societal, and a lot of it has to do with deep-seated emotional issues, where there's this Madonna whore complex going on. So the whore is the woman they can have sex with because she's useless and worthless, dirty slut. I mean, I hate using those words, but basically that's what it comes down to. Or they're the Madonna. They're respectable and caring and loving and compassionate, and they're maternal. And you don't sleep with women that are the Madonnas. So this is kind of where some of it starts. Now the cerebral narcissists will go through cycles as they start new relationships to garner new narcissistic supply. And I know in my relationship, this is exactly what happened before me with my ex-husband and what's going to happen after me. I already know it. I've kind of finally, it's been heartbreaking, horrible to see the truth of the relationship, to see that I fell in love with an image and not a real person. it's been very difficult because I was so madly in love with him and I trusted him truly. As you well know, having gone through this or going through this, it's painful beyond words. And even just the aftermath of the abuse is hard. So when it comes to the sexual part of our relationship and how he manifested it and saw it, he had this cycle that he would constantly go through. He likes stable narcissistic supply, as most cerebral narcissists do, so he tends to have more longer relationships. And what he tends to do is he goes out into the playing field, right, single, has a lot of crazy sex, does a lot of things like swinging, and this is literally, I'm talking about the actual criteria or the actual breakdown of what cerebral narcissists do. And I'm talking about my ex-husband because he fits into every single part of it, of that breakdown, which is just incredible how textbook he is. So he goes out into the playing field and looks for a partner. Now, he's even had admitted this to me, saying that he had to put on that front sexually because no woman, and I quote, no woman that I would want to be with me if they saw how I really was sexually. Interesting, right? He was somewhat self-aware of the game he was playing and the facade on a very basic level. But of course, when I brought that up later, he denied saying it, just like everything else. So, the rules just change on a whim. So his cycle, he goes out there, he puts on this image. He might go out and get very aggressive. Most cerebral narcissists do in the cycle period of their sexuality. He gets very aggressive sexually and wants a lot of sex and will sleep with random women, go to swingers clubs. For all I know, I don't have proof of this, but I do believe maybe even hookers, definitely porn, interactive webcams and stuff like that, threesomes or whatever he can do. And then he looks for the mate and he gets a partner, and the cycle then goes back to where it was before. And he'll stop wanting to have sex because, first of all, the Madonna whore complex comes up. Second of all, the idea of sex for cerebrals is very unevolved. And they see themselves as more enlightened and beyond this primal, animalistic, almost ridiculous act, which is sex. So they get into the relationship and they see the relationship in their narcissistic supply as something bigger and better than what sex, this primal animalistic thing. And sex goes out the window. As I said, in my relationship, it was gone completely, and it seriously impacted the relationship. That alone should have gotten me out. But I was so in love with him that I listened to his nonsense and his excuses and his promises, which he never came through on, of course. I mean, he would promise me we will start being sexual this date, the second week of whatever month. That's when my 12-step program is going to complete, or that's when some nonsense, but he never would follow through. So you have this cycle, then they'll stay in the relationship. And cerebrals will often not even cheat because sex is that unimportant to them during these cycles, but some of them do cheat. I know that my ex-husband cheated. It wasn't exorbitant like a lot of people who have dated somatic narcissists, which cheating is just the number one hallmark, and lying. But my ex as a cerebral lied just as much, but I never quite understood what some of the lies were covering. And I do have proof now that he did cheat on occasion, enough to warrant, a breakup, but not anything like the stories of the somatic narcissist who will have cheated with 200 women or something crazy like that. So then he'll stay in the relationship and get that narcissistic supply until it starts to devalue his partner, see the flaws. But the bigger thing I've noticed with some cerebrals and with my ex-husband is the devaluation stage and the discard stage happens only after their partner is fed up. Because I look at myself, for example, and his ex-girlfriend, once he was fed up with, or once his partner, once I was fed up with his nonsense, his being late, his not coming through on promises, his not showing up, his blowing me off, his, whatever it may be. Once I started to question this, well, my narcissistic supply, my supply is tainted now, and it's not real. So he goes out and finds someone else. And the cycle repeats. He becomes overly sexual. He becomes angry at his mother, getting back at her, being almost violent. I dare say violent, but he used that word sometimes, talking about in retrospect. And, I think that it's an important lesson to be learned, especially while we go out into the world and we start to date again and have relationships again, and this time ensure that we don't end up with a narcissistic partner or somebody with a borderline or cluster B personality disorders. The lack of empathy, the control issues. I could go on and on and on. It's so toxic and unhealthy. So when it comes to sex and cerebrals, their spouses tend to become disenchanted, and that was what I was talking about before. And it's at that point that the cerebral narcissist will start to devalue and discard their partner. And they always seem to prefer porn, masturbation, time maybe with hookers, but especially porn, masturbation, and maybe interactive webcams to real sex with a real person. Part of that is the intimacy factor. They want to avoid intimacy at all costs. The other is that it brings things into a real forum, and it's too overwhelming for them. And really, it's just that they're totally focused on themselves. So when you think about that, having sex with another person requires a certain amount of empathy in terms of, not acting in certain ways, even if it was gratifying for you, because you can see why that person may not want it. It requires a sense of compromise, a sense of openness, and none of the narcissists want to do that. So it makes sense that they really hyper-focus on porn and other non-in-person modes of having sex. And what's interesting is that they will often withhold the sex, as I said before, altogether. And then it's part of that cycle that I mentioned before. Another thing that Sam Finken talks about a lot, and I personally do believe this, that there are quite a few cerebral narcissists that are in the closeted homosexuals, that they live as a heterosexual, but deeply they're homosexual. I often wondered this about my ex-husband. I'm not saying he is or isn't. I have no proof of that. It was just something that always stuck in my craw, if you will. And through talking to other people and other partners that have been through this, I have seen a lot of men that end up coming out later on that are cerebral narcissists and have been hiding under this asexual cover, right? So during the hypersexuality, there's a lot of really intense, often a lot of really intense engagement in sex that the cerebral narcissist will do. And later on, maybe not even, later on looking back and saying, and my partner would, recognizing how gross, almost not gross, but how juvenile or how animalistic and lowbrow and of a low state of mind that it was to behave in that way. And I agree. I do, but they see it from a very different perspective of seeing themselves as above and enlightened beyond sex. Because they're terrified with intimacy, this will often push a lot of women away when the relationship starts to develop. So I did not listen to my intuition. I chose to ignore it. I had tried to end it with my ex probably every 4 to 8 weeks. because of all these little feelings I had that I couldn't explain, all this, even though I was still enchanted by him and under his spell and in love with him, I still had little feelings of ick going on that I didn't pay attention to. And so I would always see with my ex-husband, that he would use sex as a tool or a weapon. And the more that I wanted it, the less he would give to me. And this is even, so his excuse for the no sex was childhood abuse and issues like that. But in reality, it was all just a bunch of nonsense. It was just a way to get out of having sex, to not have to bond with me in that way, to see himself as enlightened, and to keep me as a form of narcissistic supply, because he always knew I was about to leave. And every time I go to leave, he would promise me something else, and I would stay. And so that cycle, as you probably will know, repeated itself over and over. Another thing my narcissist did, which Sam Vinkin specifically mentioned in one of his videos, is that he would overschedule himself all the time, with sometimes just so absurd, like he'd be working literally a full-time job, then work at a bar, Irish pub at night on the weekends until 6:30 in the morning, and then do a master's program online, and then go to the gym every day, and then be a part of a Gaelic football club, and then just massive, just nonstop, just fills the schedule to the point where he could not fit even a regular dinner with us, let alone sex, really. So this was another way of putting up the wall and stopping any amount of intimacy from occurring. Now, whether or not he could even feel that intimacy, look, narcissists don't have empathy, and their concept of love, even if they can quote unquote love to some degree, is very flawed. Really, what they're doing is they're loving themselves by virtue of you. They're not loving you. Which, when you think about it, your head starts to explode. They're loving, when they love, especially cerebral, somatic might not even, have any real romantic or intimacy feelings. But the cerebrals and inverteds, or whatever you want to call them, on coverts, will often feel as though they love. But really, when you break it down, they don't even know what love is. Love requires a certain amount of intimacy and a certain amount of consistency, that person's going to be there. And my ex was never like that with anybody. So he would just constantly fill his schedule. So if you see any of these traits in someone or in your spouse, seriously start to look and remain vigilant, or stop dating them, especially if it's something new. That somebody always has an excuse, always has a reason for something else. Because they prefer emotionless sex. They prefer having a wall up. They don't want to get close. They don't want to feel connected. And the truth is, as the therapist that had worked with us in couples therapy had told me, I have another podcast video about that. That was my big aha moment. He had told me that narcissists, people with what he was diagnosed with, which was NPD and BPD comorbid, borderline and narcissistic personality disorder, with traits of antisocial personality disorder. I don't think it could get much worse. That they are virtually incapable of truly loving like normal humans, and there's no amount of therapy or love that will ever really fix that. And that's sad. It is, and it was very hurtful for a long time with him. Another thing they may do is use their partner as a shield, per se, against having to interact with or have any kind of connection or relationship with a woman, because clearly they're already in a relationship. Because secretly, all narcissists hate their moms. Male narcissists hate their moms. And in this video, I am talking more about men and using the pronoun him, but look, there are just as many females out there. You just gotta find them or not find them. Anyway, so when we have a partner who rejects us sexually, uses us as a shield, hates women, projects on his hatred for his mother onto all women. My ex point blank told me several times he hates women. He hates all women. He gets scared by them, can't talk to them, and that I am one of the only women that he's okay with. Now, I don't even believe that, looking back. I think that was nonsense. But the only time really he can be okay with women is if he's in 100% control and power and possibly having sex with them, I think, in order to submit that power over them. So these are just some of the signs of the covert/cerebral narcissist and related to sex. And I find that sex is a great microcosm of the macro of a person's personality, somebody's viewpoint on things. That this is a very, very important part of us as humans. And I just want to end this podcast with this, because I went for so long with hardly having any sex with my partner, and even going so long without having any sex with him, or any kind of sexual real connection, or kissing, passionate kissing, or touching, or anything like that. I think that I have to remind myself that their rejection of us has nothing to do with us. It has to do with them and their power play. There's never going to be somebody pretty enough or skinny enough or tall enough that will get him out of that, because he is pathological. And another thing is to remember is that when we talk about, sorry about the beeping. I don't know why, it's 2:30 in the morning and there are people outside. I live in Chicago. That there are, it's important to realize, right, that when it comes to sex, that sex is very important. Us feeling comfortable, us feeling wanted, us feeling connected. Don't let society and the narcissists out there and the mainstream media and whomever else allow you to think that, or let you feel bad for thinking your truth, which is that sex is important, and that it's important for intimacy, and that it hurts to be rejected by someone you love. Sex is important. And so I leave you on that note. If you end up with somebody, again, who you see these things with, run. If you're in a relationship where you feel like you're being abused, or do you see any of the symptoms I've been talking about and the traits I've been talking about in all my podcasts and videos, please run. You can go to, if you feel that your partner's going to be violent, you can go to a domestic shelter. I also help women figure out plans of how to leave and how to reinvent themselves and create a new life. I have pretty good background in that. So you can also contact me. I'll put my info down in the bottom of the description. So namaste, everyone.